today. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Anne Young, Head of Strategic Planning at the Heritage Lottery Fund, to give us a short presentation, and I hope Anne will be happy to take a few questions after that. So, Anne Young.
Many thanks, Steve. Sorry, I'll stand near to the microphone. I just wanted to reflect really on some of what I've heard already today, and also to thank Miranda and Romilly for putting together such a brilliantly stimulating day of discussion. As a Programme Director for Catalyst, I was just really pleased to hear the value that the cohort model has been working well for you in these two projects, because that's really what we were looking for when we established the programme, to offer these sort of peer learning opportunities that were very specific and relevant to your interests, so that's great. I also thought it was really interesting hearing how the local authority members of those cohorts are doing, making progress with developing new models that will support philanthropic and enterprising activity, and I'm sure there'll be lots of people around the country who will want to learn from your experiences so far. We've had some strong messages about the importance of getting governance structures right and getting the leadership right from the top. That's certainly something that resonates with an awful lot of our other funding, and something we're starting to emphasise more throughout our funding, and potentially providing some funding for people to do governance reviews, so we want to encourage that. And finally, just going back to the very first presentation, the importance of having a legacy strategy in place if you haven't already got one, which will come up in a second when I talk about endowments. So, sorry, that's me. Today I want to talk to you about the investments HLF has made in organisational resilience, what we've learned so far and how that's influencing our future direction of travel. This has been primarily through the Catalyst programmes and also Transition Funding programme, which supports organisations to undertake strategic change in order to become more financially sustainable and resilient. These programmes were introduced with the current strategic framework, which was launched in 2012, and it was in a specific response to the political and economic climate, recognising that just as the UK was recovering from recession, the boundaries of public funding were also being redrawn, and new models of governance, leadership and management would be needed in the heritage sector. So HLF has invested £6.6 billion since 1994, of which around £2 billion is for capital projects that are now complete. So a significant motivation for us here is also to ensure that these projects continue delivering the benefits originally intended for what is often up to a contract life of 25 years. You'll all be aware that despite the more positive than expected spending review settlement for the cultural sector, local authority museums in England now face significant risks, as they'll be hit by the cut in the local government grant from DCLG, which will fall from £11.5 billion in 2015-16 to £5.4 billion in 2019-20. And we're certainly currently seeing organisations considering a range of possible responses to this, for anything from proposed closures to the introduction of admission charges, some of them transferring to trust status, some looking at sales and collections. So it seems to us that the need for funding to support organisational resilience in the sector remains essential and as much needed as ever, and we intend to build on what's been achieved to date. But I would caveat that a little to say that 3 years of our experience of these programmes isn't an awfully long time when assessing their long-term impacts. Some of our evaluations won't report for another year or two. But nonetheless, we think we've got enough signals and pointers to what is working to have some confidence that we should be using those to influence our future planning. I'm sure you all recognise the Mary Rose Museum. This was a £26 million award from Heritage Lottery Fund for the towards the capital development, and we also made a Catalyst Endowment Award of £1 million to establish a £2 million endowment fund in total. Talking about endowments first, Catalyst Endowments was an ambitious partnership programme launched jointly with the Arts Council and DCMS in 2012. It's a match funding scheme designed to support the development of an endowment and encourage new long-term relationships between heritage organisations and their donors. The HLF grant matches every pound raised by the grantee on a sliding scale, so an award of £500,000 has a match ratio of 1:1, whereas an award of £5 million has a 3:1 match, i.e. you need to raise £15 million to secure the £5 million grant. I think it's fair to say this approach is relatively novel for the sector, although there were some similar match funding examples in the higher education sector. HLF's aspiration was not just to establish significant endowments under management to generate core funds for years into the future. That was an important aim, and that of course relates to protecting our past investment in heritage. But we also wanted to encourage a bit more of a culture change towards longer term strategic planning and thinking in the sector. So in total we made 31 awards between £500,000 and £5 million across 2 batches, one in 2012, one in 2013, with the potential to draw down £36 million of HLF and DCMS investment if all the campaigns were successful. So how are we doing? Well, a number of grantees have completed and raised the full amount already. A couple of examples I can give you because they are in the public domain is Pallant House Gallery and the National Portrait Gallery. Other grantees are still fundraising to meet their targets, with the first batch due to complete in June 2016 and the second batch in June 2017. We have an ongoing evaluation being undertaken by Beth Breeze at the University of Kent. And through this, I think we've got some of the first substantial evidence of what the likely success factors are and the challenges too in running endowment campaigns of this kind in the heritage sector. Grantees who are doing well have adopted some or all of the following approaches. This resonates very much with what you heard this morning. They have engaged boards of trustees who are willing to provide very visible leadership to the fundraising campaign. They have existing legacy fundraising strategy so that unrestricted and obviously unexpected donations of this sort can be applied to the endowment campaign and then match funded by HLF. They've used strong branding and promotional strategies. For example, the National Portrait Gallery had a very strong portrait fund promotion on site, which extended into their restaurant. So they were encouraging diners to add a quid, I think it was, to their tip, and they applied that to the campaign. Some have very successfully used double matching opportunities. That is getting a major donor to commit so that other smaller scale donations are being matched 4 to 1 rather than 2 to 1. And some have had innovative practices, by which I mean innovative for that particular organisation. So I know of one particular one, it was the first time they'd been able to use wealth screening as part of the campaign and had some success from that. The challenges where organisations have had difficulties have actually tended not to be to do with a sort of failure of the fundraising strategy at all. They've been more around organisational challenges that they may simply not have been able to foresee when they embarked on the Catalyst campaign. So sometimes the fundraising resource has been diverted to fundraise to cover core costs because that's the urgent need. Some have mentioned staff turnover as being a bit of an issue because when you're trying to develop strong long-term relationships with donors, and some have simply had such significant organisational change that the Catalyst campaign has sort of ceased to be a strong priority. And those are things that we need to think about emphasising in any future endowment programmes. Think about these issues before you start. So, to date, the 2 cohorts of endowments grantees have raised 27.6 million in new donations. So when matched by HLF, that's created endowments to the value of 43 million under management in the sector, with a further 4 months fundraising remaining for cohort 1 and 16 months for cohort 2. When we designed the endowment programme, we were aware that not all organisations would want to fundraise for an endowment, or indeed would be in a position to build an endowment and benefit from it. And we also had done some research which illustrated that the capacity building need in the sector around fundraising and income generation, which found that there was very low capacity to fundraise in the sector. There were skills gaps. Sometimes there were more cultural issues like a lack of willingness among people to engage in fundraising or make asks, as people have illustrated this morning. And there was a general lack of opportunity for innovative methods of learning that might be more attractive to individuals in the cultural sector, such as peer learning. So through Catalyst umbrellas and a Catalyst small grant programme, our aim has been to support a real step change in organisational and fundraising behaviour, but we're also aware that this change takes time and that the activity might not yield immediate benefits. I'm going to talk about some of the immediate benefits, but we're hoping they will carry on too. We have an evaluation in train with DC Research, and John Johnson's here somewhere today, of the Catalyst Umbrella grants, which were grants between £100,000 and £500,000 with a total investment of £3.4 million. I'm not going to run through in detail what the Catalyst Umbrella programme's done, because you've obviously heard a lot about the two particular projects here. Just to say, there are 9 projects in total. Some of them are operating UK-wide, some of them are operating in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales separately. And you know, all are meeting together regularly as project managers and developing really good evidence, I think, that the key outputs are being achieved across the programmes. So it's a positive story to date. Obviously, we'd like to build on this in the future. On to Catalyst small grants. These were grants of £3,000 up to £10,000 to individual organisations for a whole range of interventions that might increase their private fundraising capacity. So anything from establishing CRM systems through to bringing in consultancy advice, lots of different activities. We were quite broad about what we were willing to support, provided they could demonstrate that it would actually have a positive longer term benefit to the organisation. And of all of the programmes, this is the one that appears to have achieved some fairly disproportionate impacts in a short time related to the size of the grants. So most of these, or I think all of these, are now complete. So they were grants made in 2013 and they were due to last a year. Some took a bit longer than that. 97% of the grantees had a fundraising strategy or plan at the end of their grant, compared to fewer than half of them at the start. Compared with a control group of organisations, there's already clear progress among grantees against sort of some key criteria around organisational capacity, staff capabilities and diversification of fundraising sources. Following project completion, 3/4 of grantees had increased the proportion of total income from private sources either significantly or moderately. And our evaluators estimated that after the first year of the programme, around 4.4 million of additional income was attributable to the Catalyst Small Grants programme. That was as against an investment from HLF of about 1.1 million. And in the second year, one grantee has had a donation of more than £1 million. That was the Canal and Rivers Trust, and they said that was directly arising from their Catalyst Small Grant project, so that's very pleasing. Finally, our survey of Catalyst Small Grantees has actually also produced encouraging evidence of an emerging culture shift in the approach of heritage organisations to fundraising, and to fundraising from private sources in particular. I just want to give you sort of one example just to give a flavour of this. This is Chiltern Open Air Museum, who were awarded £10,000 through the Catalyst Small Grants. They bought a wedding licence for 3 years and developed and marketed a wedding package. They developed a private giving programme through targeted marketing materials on-site and via digital media. They did some promotion of crowdfunding, and they developed and marketed a treasure hunt offer in connection with the Treasure Trails website. And in their evaluation, they said that the impact of this grant will be felt for many years to come as the museum develops new income streams from weddings and a continued rise in on-site giving. At the time of reporting, 5 weddings had been booked for 2015, with more booked for 2016 and 2017, projected income of £10,000 in the first year of delivery. Signs around the site highlighting a charity status have prompted legacy and regular giving inquiries. New acrylic donation boxes with carefully branded charity message signs are prompting at least double the visitor donation from previous years. So not rocket science by any means, but some very positive progress, I think. Okay, this is the Jeffrey Museum. I'm going to talk about transition funding. Since 2013, we've invested £4.3 million in 67 transition funding projects. These grants have enabled a wide range of strategic and organisational developments to take place, some within organisations facing very pressing financial crises. Others have been a more strategic approach to looking at issues that are going to arise in the future and planning to make changes to business models to address future challenges. All of the grantees to this programme are previous recipients of HLF funding, and the grants available are from £10,000 to £100,000. It is early days to draw conclusions about the long-term impacts of the programme, but we have a tracking study of a number of individual projects going, and that is demonstrating some positive developments. All of the organisations are showing an improvement in at least 2 of the 3 programme outcomes. So that's heritage being better managed, staff or volunteers have developed new skills, the organisation is more resilient. Some are already showing a marked increase in capabilities around skills to be more resilient and approaches to managing change. As the funder, this provides us with some reassurance that these organisations have chosen the right to do the right things in order to improve their abilities in this area. However, most of the grantees being tracked are reporting negative changes about their financial sustainability, and this is due to impacts in their external environment continuing, with mixed feedback in terms of their future optimism. Some projects remain particularly vulnerable to external market forces and local authority funding and influence in particular. This is completely unsurprising, obviously. Reflecting on the challenges projects have identified, most are finding the financial situation difficult and have accepted that they are likely at best to tread water in the future. So I think for HLF, we need to make sure that we've got evaluation frameworks in place that will capture their development going forward. We want to find out whether we are really stabilising organisations for a couple of years or making a long-term change. Plans to create new revenue streams and generate income are showing signs of success, however. For the People's History Museum, as an example, replacing 10% of income from a new funding source within 12 months was a remarkable feat. And obviously we will explore how we can encourage the sharing of the learning from this and whether approaches can be replicated. Transition funding has also helped projects to secure longer-term funding through HLF and other funders. The outcomes and benefits of the Jeffrey Museum's Transition Fund grant are clearly having a direct bearing on its capacity to raise £4 million of additional funds by 2017 in order to match an 11 million grant from HLF for a capital development. The museum's new capacity and resources, acquired through our support, have also given its management team the confidence to draw down additional funding from Arts Council England to appoint a new commercial manager. So, our conclusions from these programmes have provided us with sufficient confidence that there's a growing need for these interventions, and for the most part they are proving effective. In November, those of you who were at the Museums Association conference would have heard our chair, Sir Peter Luff, announce some changes and introducing new measures to support resilience in 2016, including launching a new Resilient Heritage programme which will combine the previous offer under transition funding, capital small grants and startup grants. So, programme opening in 2016. We've included some new features based on research and feedback from the sector. Current grantees have highlighted the importance of flexibility within the programme for transition funding type interventions, and we will aim to retain that. We know from other research that interventions need to be tailored, and that a diagnostic step in the process is key, and also that mentoring is highly valued. We're hoping to make available a diagnostic tool similar to that developed by the Big Lottery Fund for other capacity building initiatives in the voluntary and community sector, so that potential applicants can do a self-assessment of their organisational strengths and weaknesses and use that to support their application. We will retain the current very simple application process for grants up to £10,000, and we still want to encourage those small-scale interventions, such as the Catalyst Small Grants type projects, but we have increased the maximum grant size to £250,000 in response to feedback from the sector. We'll continue to offer mentor support paid for through the grant for organisations that want that. And we also want to continue to support early stage planning with funding for new organisations, so creating the right legal structures, doing some very early stage strategic options appraisals, primarily supporting asset transfer type projects. We'll publish the budget for this initiative in early April. It will be more than we've had available under transition funding so far, and announcing the time frame for the launch of this later on in the spring. So just a sort of a caveat, please don't contact your local HLF office and ask for lots of extra information about this programme right now, because they'll shoot me when I get back. But we will be launching properly on the website. My current guess is late spring, early summer, but we will probably put out a communication around that shortly. And finally, heritage endowments. So, over the summer of 2015, we commissioned the Centre for Philanthropy at the University of Kent to complete a piece of work to gather views on the Catalyst Endowments programme so far and endowment fundraising to support heritage. This was to establish whether there was a demand in the sector for any further investments of this type. Response was very positive. The main findings, which were from 106 survey respondents who were all HLF grantees, were 98% said that endowment fundraising was important to the heritage sector. 94% agreed that it was a good use of lottery money. 81% said that endowment fundraising was important to their own organisation, and 70% said that if Catalyst Endowment was to be repeated, they would be likely to apply. So, based on that and other findings from our ongoing evaluation, we're going to run a further batch programme building on the Catalyst Endowments programme with some amendments. In order to make the programme more accessible to smaller organisations, we're introducing a grant level of £250,000 for the first time. We acknowledge that, therefore, building an endowment of £500,000 isn't going to generate huge amounts of additional income, but it's a start, and I think that's the important point. Almost all Catalyst Endowment grantees are starting on a journey and intend to build their endowment further after the programme. We propose to offer maximum grants of £1 million and therefore a 1-to-1 match ratio for all grants. Also, based on the experience of earlier batches, we will, for the first time, offer some additional resource budget for resourcing the fundraising campaign of up to 10% of the grant spread over the 4 years of the campaign. I mean, that means that if you were applying for a £1 million grant, effectively £100,000 of that could be for your fundraising resource, but we will expect people to match that with a commitment from their organisation on a one-to-one basis too. Hopefully this will address some of the issues that have arisen with one or two of the initial grantees. And finally, we'll offer a longer lead time between the launch of the application guidance and the deadline than previously, so that potential applicants can really consider the pros and cons of making an application, and also we will want to run some pre-application workshops too. So I just want to leave you with one final thought. We have on our website some online communities, including one for Catalyst, which are really places for anyone interested in fundraising to share information, share resources and experiences, and you can use the Catalyst online community. We now have an open thread. If you want to take a look at that, you just need to go to the website and log in. We really want to make these useful resources for sharing experiences and useful tools and tips. So do take a look if you can. Thank you very much for your time today, and thank you very much for inviting me.